Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 77 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we are breaking out the panic meter. We're going to discuss some players at each position that we may or may not need to panic about after week one. So we're going to discuss those performances and more here on today's show. As always, make sure you are following this podcast on your platform of choice. We're on everything out there, so Spotify, Apple, YouTube, you name it, we're there. So go make sure you are subscribed or following along so you don't miss any future shows. And go find us on social media. We are on Twitter or X at Dynasty War Room. You can find our YouTube channel at the same handle. And we have a Facebook page as well if you are old school and still active over there on Facebook. So go like our page there and follow along for show updates. So with all that out of the way, one more quick message. I want to remind you all about my friends at Fast Draft. It's a best ball app. It's awesome. Highly recommend you go check it out. Use code WARROOM when you sign up and deposit $50. You'll get a full deposit match. Gives you a total of $100 to play with on Fast Draft. Again, that's with code WARROOM. So go check that out, download it, and enjoy some drafting here now that the season has begun. All right, so let's move on into players that we need to discuss after week one. So it's been a couple weeks since we've had a show. Was out on vacation for a few weeks with my wife. We went to Europe and I had a great time. But the last time that we spoke and discussed fantasy football together was with the My Guys episode. So we now are into the regular season. Week one is complete and in the books. And there were a lot of performances that I think raised some question marks for their expectations for the rest of the season, for their dynasty value, and just how confident managers can be putting some of these guys into their lineup moving into week two and beyond. So I've got a number of guys here. I've got actually a pretty good list of quarterbacks that we're going to discuss on today's show, along with a few running backs, wide receivers, a couple tight ends, and then two teams that I just want to mention. So we'll start with the quarterback position because I think, especially in dynasty or superflex leagues, the quarterback position is so important, and we have a lot of young guys that struggled in week one. So the first player I want to bring up, and we're going to be talking about these players in the context of the panic meter. So we'll go 1 to 10, just on a scale of 1 to 10, how much should managers be panicking about these players or be worried that their value is going to drop off given their poor performance to start the season? Is it a sign of things to come? That sort of thing. So the first player on my list is Houston Texans quarterback CJ Stroud, who obviously came out and had a really nice rookie season, really hyped up. He was a top 5 startup pick entering last season. Didn't live up to that hype, had a rough sophomore season. Here we go, year 3, revamped offensive line, some new offensive weapons at receiver. Running backs are a little bit different with Nick Chubb entering the mix, Woody Marks, etc. And it was another rough performance for Stroud against the Rams in week one. All the quarterbacks we're talking about today, none of them were able to surpass 10 fantasy points. And that's in 4-point passing, scoring. And CJ Stroud, Nico Collins was a huge fantasy bust in week one. Stroud did not look good. He didn't play well. They didn't really, it was a somewhat competitive game, but no thanks to the Houston offense. The offensive line is still a huge concern in Houston. And I think my level of panic for CJ Stroud is going to be a 6 out of 10 because this is now entering another season where, I think the expectation is that he'd bounce back, he'd be fine. We saw him do it as a rookie, so he's got to bounce back. The sophomore year slump is what's going to be the anomaly, and it's a rough start. I'm not overly worried about him yet. But, at a 6 out of 10, I think the concern level should be that hey, you might not have the true franchise quarterback that you think you had. Because if he really struggles throughout the year, there's going to be some tough conversations at the end of the season about, is this a player that Houston can extend? Do they let the contract situation play out? He obviously is going to have the ability to have a fifth-year option. So we're starting to look way down the future here, but we wouldn't have to ask any of these questions if he just comes out and has a couple good games in a row. Everyone's going to come to the conclusion that, all right, he's back, he's good to go, but it's rough. The offensive line is really bad, and he's not a running quarterback, so he's really a touchdown-dependent guy. And if he doesn't have time to throw, if the Houston offense with their new OC can't get things moving, it could be a rough year for fantasy for Houston and C.J. Stroud. The next guy on this list is Miami Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, who is a 9 out of 10. I mean, 9 out of 10 on the panic meter for him. I think we are absolutely in the danger zone with him. The only reason he's not a 10 out of 10 is because he does have a huge contract, so it's going to be pretty difficult for Miami to move off of him after the season. They certainly could, but they would take something like a $70-something million cap hit. So some concerns about the contract, but it was an abysmal performance in week one by Miami as a whole. I mean, their entire offense was bad, and Tua, was the leader of that offense. It certainly doesn't seem like Mike McDaniel is going to be around for the long haul if things continue. The Colts are an average football team. It's not like they went out and got wrecked by the Bills or the Ravens or, the Chiefs, anybody like that. This was a winnable game for Miami, and losing isn't the issue. I mean, you can lose games. It's the fact that they weren't even remotely competitive, and Tua looked terrible. There were defensive players after the game coming out basically talking about how Tua's a first-read quarterback, and when they were able to disrupt that, they knew that they were going to be able to get to him, and it was going to be, one of those games for Tua where things just don't go well. And it was bad. I mean, Jalen Waddle struggled. Tyreek Hill struggled. Now there's off-the-field issues again coming up again for Tyreek Hill. So things are just really, really messy in Miami. So I'm worried very much about Tua. I think there's obviously the injury concerns with him as well, but this was not injury-related. This was entirely bad performance and just terrible quarterback play from Tua. So I think you should be on high alert for him. I don't think you should just give him away for nothing. I think doing that with a quarterback is just bad process in general. But if you can move off of him for another player that you believe in, I think that could be an appropriate time, although his value, at least at the moment, has certainly taken a huge hit after week one. So it could be a situation where if you get a good game from Tua in the next couple weeks, you try to sell him right after that, because I am worried that things are going to just completely fall apart for Miami. They were a team that I was really down on coming into the year, and week one sort of confirmed my position on Miami being a last place team, and Tua just did not look good. Next up is going to be Bo Nix, who is one of my guys, a player that I really believe in. And my panic meter for Bo Nix is a 1 out of 10. I'm not worried at all. He had a tough first game against Tennessee, who was starting their own young quarterback, who we might as well loop into this conversation. So Cam Ward is the next guy on my list as well. I'm going to give him a 2 out of 10. So Bo Nix, Cam Ward, both players I'm not particularly worried about yet. Certainly not with Bo Nix. We saw things last year. He was great. Tennessee has a tough defense. Their offense certainly has a lot of holes on it and is not a very prolific offense. So I'm not terribly surprised that it was a lower scoring game in general, but the fact that Bo Nix did throw the ball 40 times and then still ended up with single-digit fantasy points is tough. But I have confidence that he'll bounce back and avoid the full sophomore slump like C.J. Stroud had. But that's why he at least makes this list, because I think you're going to have that in the back of your head. You're going to be a little bit worried given what we've seen in recent years from those second-year quarterbacks that can struggle a little bit. So Bo Nix, 1 out of 10. Cam Ward with the 2 out of 10. I put him a little bit above Nix because I think it's tough to really judge a rookie based on just one game played. So I'm not going to, totally pile on to Cam Ward. But it wasn't a good game. Tennessee didn't look good. He didn't look good. And I think there's a lot of growth that is going to need to come for Ward throughout the season. But I think he's got the time and he's going to have the runway to do so. So I'm not terribly worried about his dynasty value dropping off. I think he's perfectly fine and stable. It's something where when you're the number one pick, you get, a couple seasons to play before people really start to bail on you. So I'm not worried about Cam Ward at this point, but it wasn't exactly a promising first game for him. 2 other number 1 overall picks make the list, and we'll go with Trevor Lawrence first. I'm at a 5 out of 10 on Trevor Lawrence because I have been a big Trevor Lawrence believer for a long time. I have him in a number of leagues, and I've always found him to be a somewhat solid value in startups, but it's kind of getting to the point where it's put up or shut up. I mean, he's got the weapons. He's got the offensive-minded head coach, and he was playing a bad team in Carolina, and he still just missed a lot of throws. He did reach the 10-point mark for fantasy football, no more than 10, but it was not a very inspiring performance. Clearly doesn't have a great connection with Brian Thomas. Travis Hunter had a solid game in his first performance as a rookie, but I'm worried that we just might never get it from Trevor Lawrence. He had that generational billing as a prospect, really hyped up, just has never lived up to the hype. And I am very fearful all of a sudden that we just might not get it. And he has a contract, so his dynasty value is not going to crater, but it is going to go down. And we might be going from a situation where Trevor Lawrence is kind of a middle of the pack to upper middle tier quarterback to one of those low end guys that is just there and doesn't really help you for fantasy. And he's going to run the risk of not being a helpful quarterback for Jacksonville in real life if he keeps up the way he's playing through 1 week. So I'm at a 5 out of 10 for him. I think he's pretty similar to CJ Stroud in that sense. And if you wanted to put them both at 5s or both at 6s, I think that's perfectly fine. I don't feel terribly different about the two, but I am a little bit more concerned about Stroud because I think he is viewed as the better fantasy quarterback. And, we now have a pretty extended streak of time where he has simply not been a productive starting level fantasy quarterback. And the final quarterback on this list is going to be Bryce Young. So the other quarterback in that Jacksonville game, and I'm at an 8 out of 10 for Bryce Young. I was very worried about him as a rookie. I was worried about him coming into last year, and then, of course, got benched, and then he came back when Dalton got hurt, and then he had an awesome end to the year. And so the hype was back with Bryce Young, and I am not as concerned about Bryce Young as I am necessarily Tua, even though Tua has the better track record. I just think things are a little bit more of a dumpster fire in Miami. But Carolina, there's a lot of positive talk and excitement around Carolina coming into 2025, and they did not look good in week 1. And so Bryce Young, it's kind of one of those things where maybe I have always been a bit down on him in the first place, and so I am still feeling that way, and every time he comes out and has a bad game kind of confirms my prior bias on him. But I'm nervous. I just don't know that he's that good. I don't know if he can be an above average NFL starter. I think average at best is his ceiling, and that's just not going to be that good for you in fantasy. So I'm worried about him. I think it's fair to panic about Bryce Young, and puts him on my list as an 8 out of 10 on the panic meter. All right, so let's switch gears and talk about a couple running backs. So I have 3 guys on my list, and The first one has got to be Caleb Johnson, because I was very excited about him during draft season. He was a first-round pick for me, and someone that, I was pretty bullish on. I was excited about him. I thought he was a good prospect. I liked the size and speed combo at Iowa. But Pittsburgh has Caleb Johnson buried on the depth chart. I mean, he was the number 3 runner behind Kenneth Gainwell and Jalen Warren, and that's really, really concerning for me. And so I have Caleb Johnson at a 9 out of 10 on the panic meter, because while he's a rookie, this is something where if you can't beat out Gainwell, I mean, man, he should be at least the number 2 on the depth chart. I have a hard time believing that he would be more ineffective as a runner than Kenneth Gainwell, but that is the situation. Arthur Smith has made bad personnel decisions in the past. He seems to have a habit of continuing to play subpar players. He did it in Atlanta. He is doing it in Pittsburgh now. And so while I still think that there is a future for Caleb Johnson, I'm not bailing on him after one game where he only got 1 carry. But I think you should be highly, highly concerned about his usage for this year. If you have Caleb Johnson in redraft, I think you can maybe give him another week, but it's something where he's probably droppable depending on your league settings and how deep your bench is, that sort of thing. If you have a deeper league, maybe you hold on to him for a bit. But if you're in a shorter bench league, 10-man league, that kind of thing, you probably don't have the space or the patience to be able to wait on a guy that is currently 3rd string of the depth chart. It's one thing when coaches put rookies lower on the depth chart as a sign of respect to veterans, but then the rookies still actually play more. This was not the case. He simply was not on the field. He was their kick returner. And so I am worried about Caleb Johnson, at least for his 2025 value. I think ultimately, if he, remains 3rd or even as just a lower tier 2nd running back for Pittsburgh, it's going to hurt his long-term value, because it's going to kind of take away that ceiling that we were hoping for, where he could step in and essentially be Najee Harris as a rookie. And right now, it doesn't look like that's going to happen for him. And so 9 out of 10 on the panic meter, I'm very, very worried about Caleb Johnson and his role in the Pittsburgh Steelers offense, because he's not an elite pass catcher. He's not an elite speed guy. He has the size. He can be a good goal line back and a good grinder and whatnot. But if he's not even on the field, I mean, it's going to be tough sledding for him in terms of his dynasty value if he can't surpass Gainwell on that depth chart. Next up is a veteran who has been pretty solid for fantasy football, but has seemed to fallen into more of a committee, and that's Kenneth Walker. Ken Walker from the Seattle Seahawks, splitting time with Zach Charbonnet. I am at a 6 out of 10 for Ken Walker, and in terms of my panic meter, and it's because this was Zach Charbonnet's backfield in week 1. I mean, Kenneth Walker was a little bit dinged up in training camp and in the preseason and whatnot, and so there was a little bit of speculation about his health, but he was ready to go, suited up. He got 10 carries, but Charbonnet was the more dominant back in terms of snaps. He had a better performance for fantasy. He got the touchdown. The only thing that Walker had was he got the 3 receptions out of the backfield, where Charbonnet did not have any. But fewer attempts, just wasn't featured as much as part of the offense. And so there is a new coaching staff on the offense in Seattle, and so I'm a little bit worried that they have just simply decided to go in more of a full committee with Charbonnet and Walker, which makes sense, I think, a bit from a real-life perspective, because Zach Charbonnet is a good running back. But for fantasy, that it really is a huge bummer for Kenneth Walker, because he was being drafted very highly. He's been a pretty productive fantasy asset through his first few seasons in the league. He's a home run hitter, and he'd caught a lot of passes last year too. So, he was a player that I was fine with taking at cost this year, at least in redraft. And I think you should be very worried about his situation. Obviously, he still is going to be on the field, but the panic here is that you probably drafted Walker to be one of your top 2 running backs. And at this point, I don't know if you could even put him in your lineup as a flex. So I think that's a pretty big loss in value that, if that continues to be the case, is going to tank his dynasty value. And so I'm at a 6 out of 10, and I'm going to be keeping an eye on him on week 2 because there is a possibility that this is more injury related. Seattle just trying to keep him healthy, first game back, work him in a little bit more slowly. But if that's not the case, we'll probably, find out relatively quickly here in the next couple games kind of what way this is going. If you don't see an increase for Walker next week, I think you might just be locked into this committee. And so 6 out of 10 for me for Ken Walker. The third running back that I want to discuss is Isaiah Pacheco, and Kansas City Chiefs running back. He is my first and lone 10 out of 10 panic for this show. And Isaiah Pacheco was brutal. He's stuck in a bad committee. He's not an explosive player anymore. He's losing touches to Kareem Hunt. The offense as a whole for Kansas City is struggling without first Rashee Rice due to suspension. Xavier Worthy went out with an injury. Hollywood Brown was racking up the targets. But the running game was simply not effective. It was non-existent for the Chiefs in week 1 against the Chargers. And I am worried about the workload because he's not a very... He's not an elite pass catcher. He's not someone that I think defenses are particularly worried about. He's a former 7th-round pick, so there's no financial capital that the team is, locked into playing him or anything like that. This is a tough situation. I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that the injury that he suffered really hurt him and kind of slowed him down. And I just don't think he's the same player anymore. So at some point, I'm expecting Pacheco to continue to lose touches. But even if he does maintain his role as, in this committee of running backs, I don't know that you're going to get a lot for fantasy. I don't know how you can have the confidence to play him. And so I think that almost is what puts him above everyone else on the panic meter, is that on paper, he's still the number 1 in the committee. He's still like the guy that's supposed to score fantasy points, and he just isn't. He didn't at the end of last year. He didn't here in week 1. I'm not that optimistic that he's suddenly going to break out and have this huge performance. And so there's no contingent upside for him. It's not like if someone else gets hurt that all of a sudden Pacheco is going to have this huge workload. It's just going to be another guy in a committee. Whereas at least with Walker and Johnson, if Charbonnet goes down or if Gainwell or Warren goes down, there should be a role for those guys that'll make them more fantasy relevant, especially for Walker. But for Pacheco, I just don't see that as being the case. And so I am pretty fearful that his fantasy value has pretty much come and gone. And I'm out on Isaiah Pacheco. I think you should be panicking about his situation. And I would be looking to unload him if you have a way to move on and get anything solid in return. All right, so let's talk about some wide receivers. I have 4 names here, and spoiler alert, but I'm not particularly worried about any of them, although I do think you should at least be keeping an eye on these guys because there is some level of concern. So we'll start with Brian Thomas Jr. from the Jacksonville Jaguars. I have him at a 4 out of 10. He was a player that I was down on coming into the season as it was. I thought he was being overranked. I thought we were looking too much into his connection with Mac Jones, who was really where he broke out last year was with Mac Jones and not with Trevor Lawrence. The inconsistent performance of Lawrence plays into this. It's clear they don't have quite the same connection, and so I think it's something to watch out for because Travis Hunter in that slot position in the lineup is seeing more action, granted through 1 week, but it could be something where you see a fairly major drop back for Brian Thomas, who at least caught a touchdown on his only catch, but it's something where I think he was already overhyped, and now you're in a situation where Lawrence isn't playing well. He is not the sole receiver in the offense anymore that teams need to pay any attention to. Travis Hunter has shown that he can move the chains and be a successful receiver through his first week in the league. So I'm a bit worried about Brian Thomas. I have him, again, at a 4 out of 10, and he's a player that I don't have on a lot of teams as it is because of my position on him coming into the season, but week 1 kind of confirmed my fears that I already had. So I think he'll bounce back a bit. Like I said, 4 out of 10 is not something that you need to be, red alert, move him at all costs type of situation. That's not the situation for Brian Thomas, but I think his dynasty value as a whole is going to take a slight hit, and so that's why he's on this list. All right, so George Pickens was another receiver who I have at a 4 out of 10 in the panic meter. He didn't look particularly great for Dallas in their week 1 game against Philly. Didn't have a good fantasy performance, did not crack double digits, and I'm not all that worried about him yet. I have him at a 4. You could even put him at a 3. He's breaking into a new offense, new team. Dallas was more effective running the ball than a lot of people expected. So that could hurt Pickens overall in the long run. But again, Philadelphia, very good defense. I'm not all that concerned about George Pickens after 1 week. But the fact that Dallas essentially still decided, hey, we're going to ignore everyone else on this offense other than CeeDee Lamb, I think, A, it shows how talented CeeDee Lamb is, but B, I think it does give you a little bit of a reason to be concerned about George Pickens, at least taking that next step. There was a lot of hype for Pickens about turning into this top 24 receiver, somebody that was going to be every week starter for your team. I don't know if he's an every week starter, and so I think that's where my panic would come in for him, is that if you were planning on that, you should probably be a little bit nervous right now. But again, it's early. I'm not overly concerned about George Pickens yet. A.J. Brown, the Philadelphia Eagles' big-time wide receiver, is on this list. I have him at a 3 out of 10 on the panic meter. He is kind of a boomer bust receiver as it is. He's kind of prone, especially in his time recently with the Eagles, to these either huge games or duds. Now, this was a bigger dud than we've seen. He was not as involved, and so I think it's fair to have a little bit of panic with him, which is why I have him at a 3 out of 10 and not 1 or 2, but I think he's going to be fine. He'll bounce back. I think you're going to have to deal with some of this inconsistency throughout the season, so I think you just have to be mentally prepared to handle that as an A.J. Brown manager this year. I don't think that he is going to necessarily be like a top 5 guy, but he's going to give you big weeks. Just didn't happen in week 1. I think it could be something too where he was battling an injury through the preseason and maybe was working through that hamstring a bit and didn't feel 100%. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm not going to panic about him too much yet. It's just simply a situation where, hey, I'm taking note, I'm keeping an eye on it, seeing how Philadelphia's offense does next week and the week after. But really nobody on the Eagles had that awesome of a week 1. Jalen Hurts was great for fantasy. Saquon Barkley was solid. But Devonta Smith was bad too, and I'm not worried about him either. So A.J. Brown, a 3 out of 10. And frankly, the injury is almost more concerning to me than the sort of bad game in week 1, because I am fearful that the hamstring will flare up later in the season. But in terms of his involvement in the offense, I'm not that worried. We'll give him more time. He's an elite receiver, and he should be fine. The same can be said for Terry McLaurin, who's the final receiver on this list. I have him at a 1 out of 10. I'm not worried at all about Terry McLaurin. Obviously, he's a veteran. He's, hitting close to 30 years old, but he just signed a new contract. He missed all of training camp, all of preseason. He sat out dealing with that contract situation. I'm not surprised at all that it's going to take him probably a few weeks to get back to where he should be, which is one of those unfortunate byproducts of a guy that has contract issues in the offseason, but he'll be fine. The Commanders will be fine. They did not need to throw the ball very much. They had full control of the game against the Giants. It was not something where they were in this back and forth battle or a high-scoring game, anything like that. I mean, they were comfortably ahead and in control of that game pretty much from the get-go. So not worried about that. Deebo Samuel had a nice game in his first performance with the Commanders, and I'm not that worried about him eating into McLaurin's role either. So I think you just got to give him probably another game or so, get his legs going. He's missed a lot of time in August, and he'll bounce back. He's one of the elite receivers in the league, and he's too important to that team for him to really fall off. I'm not worried at all about Terry McLaurin. All right, so I got 3 tight ends, and we'll get through these guys pretty quick. David Njoku is the first name on the list. I have him at a 3 out of 10 on the panic meter, and there's a lot of hype right now about Harold Fannin Jr., who had a really nice week 1. In fact, I think was better than pretty much everyone expected. I did not envision him being so involved in the offense. But David Njoku was still on the field a lot. He still had a number of targets. I think he's going to be fine. I mean, the worry with him is that it could be a rough offense in general. They didn't look that great against a bad Cincinnati defense. And so for those reasons, I think you could be a little bit concerned about Njoku, but I don't think that Harold Fannin is going to just take his job away. This is still going to be David Njoku's role on the team. He's going to be fine. He's a low end tight end 1. I think that's kind of where he fits in and where he's been. And so he's not somebody I'm all that concerned about. Now, if we go a couple more weeks here where he's having very mediocre performances and Harold Fannin Jr. is kind of turning into more of the dominant pass catching tight end, then I think we'll have a bit of a different conversation. But as of right now, it's only very mild concern for me, and that's why he's at a 3 out of 10. All right, 2 other guys, though, that I am a little bit more concerned about. We'll start with TJ Hockenson, who I have at a 5 out of 10 on the panic meter. And it's not so much to do with TJ Hawkinson's talent level. It's that I think the Vikings offense might be a little bit lower in terms of pass volume this year. We saw J.J. McCarthy come out, another guy who was a my guy. He really struggled through the first 3 quarters of that Monday night game against the Bears, and then he turned it all around. It was awesome in the fourth quarter, leading the Vikings to the win. But still, only 20 pass attempts for J.J. McCarthy in the Minnesota offense, and Hockenson was a dud. And so Justin Jefferson is obviously going to be fed the ball. Jordan Addison is out for the next 2 weeks and then will return for the 4th game of the season. He's going to command some targets. And so the fact that Hockenson was kind of more of an afterthought already without Addison, I am a bit concerned that it could be something where Hockenson is a better real-life tight end than fantasy this year. So we're just going to have to monitor the volume of the passing attack in Minnesota to see how things play out, because he's clearly going to be behind at least Jefferson and likely Addison. And so I think it is fair to expect a little bit of regression in terms of stats for fantasy for the third option with what is essentially a rookie quarterback. Now, I do think that J.J. McCarthy showed a lot of good things in that fourth quarter. You can't just totally get rid of the first 3 quarters. There was obviously some bad quarterback play there, but I think it showed that he's got what it takes. It's just going to maybe take a bit of time for things to fully gel and come together. So Hockenson, I'm at a 5 out of 10. If McCarthy really explodes and puts things together quickly, that number will get lower, but mainly from a volume standpoint, I think you should be a bit concerned about TJ Hockenson. And finally, Cade Otton, who got shut out in week 1, despite no Chris Godwin, despite no Jalen McMillan. I mean, it was Egbuka and Mike Evans, and those guys look great, especially Egbuka. In Tampa Bay won their first game in a pretty wild finish against Atlanta, but Cade Otton was not involved. He had a minor injury recently in the preseason, but he was back. He was ready, just was not involved. So I think you should absolutely be worried about him. That's why I have him at a 7 out of 10 on the panic meter. I think he really was kind of a one-hit wonder with his month last year where he was great with all the receivers injured for Tampa Bay. But there's enough depth there right now that it's going to take another set of injuries for him to really be an important fantasy tight end. So if you were counting on him as a starter or a flex option or anything like that, I don't even know that he can be a great number 2 tight end in Dynasty. If you need a guy for bye weeks, he's just a guy that you plug in and you hope that he scores a touchdown, and not super excited about that possibility after his slow start to the season. All right, so 2 teams that I want to mention. The Lions, the Detroit Lions came out and they were terrible against Green Bay. I mean, the offense was bad. The offensive line was really, really rough. They couldn't run the ball. They had issues with the crowd noise, communication. I mean, it was bad all the way around. Sam Laporta had a nice game, largely due to a lot of fourth quarter checkdowns, that sort of thing. Jahmyr Gibbs caught 10 passes, but for basically 0 yards. Pretty wild stat line, 10 receptions and he had 31 yards. So a lot of short area passing for Jared Goff and the Lions. I am putting the Detroit offense at a 3 out of 10. I'm not that concerned yet. It was one game against what is likely to be a very good defense. Green Bay looked far better than I expected, and I think they just need some time to gel. The Lions have a young offensive line, a rookie guard at right guard, and then a second-year player at left guard that only had a couple starts last season, and a new center as well in Graham Glasgow, who's moving over from guard to replace Frank Ragnow. So I think the O-line is really the big concern. So on an individual standpoint, I think David Montgomery is the guy that I'd be worried about the most. But from a team perspective, I think guys like St. Brown and Gibbs, Laporta, etc., they're going to be fine. J-Mo, who just got an extension, I think we need to give this a little bit of time to gel. They might not be as elite as they were the past 2 seasons, but I think in a way, most people should have been expecting at least a small drop-off, given how insane those offenses were. Now we got the O-line changes, the coordinator change, some things to work through for the Lions, but I'm not particularly worried. I think they'll be fine and still back to, they'll give you plenty of fantasy points over the next few matchups, and they've got a nice, juicy Week 2 game at home against the Bears, who are struggling with some injuries in the secondary. So I think we'll see a bounce back from Detroit in Week 2. And the final team is the Cincinnati Bengals, who, if you drafted Jamar Chase first overall in your redraft league, you took Joe Burrow to stack with him, you did not have a very exciting fantasy weekend because the Bengals offense was terrible. Joe Burrow did not get things moving. Jamar Chase was practically completely uninvolved. Chase Brown was probably the lone bright spot. He had a touchdown, a couple nice runs, but he got bottled up a bit after he did score that touchdown. So T. Higgins didn't reach double-digit points, and so pretty rough day overall against the Browns. But I have the Bengals as a 2 out of 10. I think they're going to be fine. Joe Burrow and the Bengals have started slow multiple years in a row, and I think they'll be just fine. Cleveland does have a tough defense. It's one of those AFC North battles where it's, you just have a lot of defense, and the Bengals will be fine. Joe Burrow is an elite quarterback. Jamar Chase, obviously the number 1 receiver last year, and should be right in the mix again this year. So no worries at all about really anybody on the Bengals. I think that their big 4 of Burrow, Chase, Higgins, and Brown are all going to be great fantasy options, and you shouldn't worry at all about Cincinnati. All right, so there you have it. Some time to panic or not, about a whole bunch of players that struggled in Week 1. We'll be back next week. We're going to switch to a little bit of a different schedule than what we did in the offseason, where we were recording on Sunday and posting on Monday mornings. typically is what we do all off season, but here in the season, we'll be posting our weekly shows typically on Wednesday mornings. I'm sure there will be some occasional Thursday mornings depending on the schedule during the week, but mostly we'll be recording Tuesday night, posting Wednesday morning. I want to be able to have watched all of the games and soaked everything in and give you guys full, up-to-date information instead of recording in the middle of the Sunday slate for Monday morning. I just don't think there's a lot of sense in doing that. And we try to, given that this is a Dynasty-focused podcast, I try to avoid kind of the weekly start-sit questions and the waiver wire stuff that comes up in a redraft league. I think there's plenty of really great shows that go into that. I want to keep my focus primarily on Dynasty and just sort of larger focused issues that affect both Dynasty and redraft that can be relevant on a week-to-week basis, and that if you miss the show on Wednesday and you listen to it a few days later or next week, it's still going to be important. It's not something where, you got to listen to this before week 2. I don't think that's the case with an episode like this. I think there's still some good lessons to learn and things to look out for. And so we'll try to do shows that fit that mold of we can listen to it over the course of a week or two. We don't have to cram it into one day. It's not highly focused on specific matchups or anything like that. So we'll see what we have. We're going to put together a schedule for the rest of the season and try to stick to it. So I appreciate you listening. Thank you very much. I hope people enjoyed their first week of the football season and picked up some nice victories in their fantasy leagues. Hopefully it will be a little while again now till we have another longer break between shows. I'm back in town, no vacations for the foreseeable future. So it's football time, and we'll be back next week with some more football discussion. So thank you very much. My name is Andrew Valancourt. You've been listening to the Dynasty War Room podcast.